Sir, I have a response to your State of the Union address. And I pose no threat to any politician whatsoever in any way, shape, form, nor fashion. None of them are worth the jail time to me. But I do feel that I pay enough in taxes that I should be able to put in my 2 cents worth. I very seriously doubt that you'll ever see this. I don't think that people like me are worth your time, which is unfortunate. However, I do feel strongly enough about some things that I am at least willing to make the attempt to speak my mind while we still have the First Amendment right to speak our minds. During your administration, you promised us the most transparent administration in history. Well, you followed through on that promise, all right, because everything that we as Americans do, and from what I understand the rest of the world too, is completely exposed and vulnerable to the NSA. And I don't mean just your political enemies. I don't mean just your adversaries. I don't mean just the actual real terrorists. I mean the average Joe American person. It's gone that far. It's to the point where literally I'm afraid to whack off to internet porn because I don't know if that's a dude or a chick or a gay guy or what on the other end of that webcam. And I do know that the rumors about NSA turning on civilian webcams are true, because not too long ago, I've been digging into this deep the past several months. Not too long ago, I took a notebook similar to this, right off the shelf. See a built-in webcam? Well, the one that I did it to had 2 of them. I also did it with an Xbox. And I replaced the optical chip. In there with one of my own design. One with a couple of little coils hooked to wires, but they were round wires. So that if that camera got turned on without the LED coming on, I would know it. I would know there was current running through there that was abnormal. I would also, because I had a scope attached, old ass Fluke DMM 9000. Wasn't even anything fancy. Literally, I've had the damn thing probably 30 years. It's that old. And watched. I was looking for audio patterns, matching voices in the room. And I did have a secondary mic on a little handheld probe scope, looking for similarities in the pattern. They were identical. So I know it does happen. And yes, I intentionally purchased machines that I knew were compromised. And in the second case, in the case of that Xbox, I traded him a PlayStation 3 and a fucking stack of games. And granted, the Xbox was modified. It did have Linux on it. It was not your off-the-shelf Xbox 360, even though, alright, it had a cooling kit, had the hot firing mod, etc. So I do know for a fact it does happen, and I don't really see the point of the NSA monitoring a kid's video game. Now, when you were running for office, you said it was disgusting that the federal government would want to lock down every aspect of our lives, but TSA has gotten so far out of hand, as has Homeland Insecurity. I don't even call them Homeland Security anymore. I call them Homeland Insecurity because it makes me feel pretty goddamn insecure knowing that a couple years ago, TPD and HS, with a couple of TSA present, not saying they were active in what was going on, but they were at least present, dismantled one of my motorcycles, a 1952 Vincent, but half 50, on the side of the road. Oh man, they put it in the crankcase, that's why they call it crank. And exposed my engine to Florida sand and wind. At which point, once they were said that they were very clearly that they were done with me, I could go on about my way. I asked them would they put it back together, but I would not have accepted it like that. Once an engine's been exposed to sand, I don't want it anymore. And that represented a couple of years of work. It broke my heart to throw that title on the ground and walk away. And yes, I know they could have gotten me for littering at that point. I also know that it was police that later sold that bike because there aren't too many Vincents remaining, especially in Florida. And when I saw it advertised, I did make a phone call and find out what the guy did for a living without letting him know who I was. The fact that they were able to get away with that, yeah, there's half my beef with Homeland Insecurity right there. It makes me feel pretty goddamn insecure knowing that they could do that. It makes me feel really insecure, and I'm sorry to use someone else's phrase, but it makes me feel really insecure to know that living within 100 miles of any United States border, I'm basically in a Constitution-free zone. My Fourth Amendment rights don't matter. They can come and just take my phone for any goddamn reason. They can take my computer and search it and do whatever the fuck they want. Destroy the son of a bitch for all intents and purposes. I'm sorry, it makes me really worry about going out and spending another $30,000 on another server. It makes me feel really insecure watching that network tonight externally, knowing that the only person using that network, the only thing that had been attached to that network was a bare Linux configuration. SUSE Linux 13.1, the brand new one, left up for 2 weeks. The trigger that drew their attention, I flashed the router with DDWRT intentionally. Now, I want you to notice, I said I flashed the router. I set that trap on purpose. I've noticed a couple of months ago, a buddy of mine in another state drew some attention by having a custom firebox online. I've noticed that Baystacks, the attention seems to go to one region of the country. Cisco's, the attention seems to go to another region of the country. And custom firmware, custom flashes seem to attract the wrong kind of attention, and it's not hackers. Now, I was a contractor, but I still have an oath to the Constitution. And it's my understanding that these NSA guys are getting clearances without ever taking an oath. I have non-compete and non-disclosure agreements for damn near everything that I worked on. When I first retired, I tried to get, I had a list. I kept track, we had to keep track of, all right, we were on this project, so that one pays it. We were on this project for a couple hours, all right, that one pays it. I kept copies of everything I did the whole 22 years that I worked. I got a stack of 4 binders comes out that thick because we kept that detailed records of each project, each task we were assigned to. kept was, I was on this project, and I never was descriptive. I just logged into this project, this project. I should have been descriptive back then. Because when I tried to get proof of what I did over the years, most of the projects I was on were so heavily redacted that the only thing that could be verified was that I was on the goddamn project from this date to this date. And that's about all that was there, was the dates. Sometimes the project identifiers, or numbers if you prefer, were redacted, or at least partially redacted. And granted, all I did was install radar and maintain radio towers, but we did a lot of experimentation with a lot of things, many of which all right, to put it politely, we fucked up and failed a lot more times than we got shit right. And even if we did get it right, half the time the government wasn't going to buy it. Or they had already gotten somebody else to fulfill the contract by the time we got it done. Or, you know, I mean, that's just how life goes. The company I worked for was really good. I would still be working today if it wasn't for what happened. But, and occasionally if I am asked to go back and look at something that I built back in the days, I do. And that brings up another point. It brings up a very valid point. I mean, the federal government is pushing this Common Core curriculum on all these kids. And before this, it was No Child Left Behind. I know that that was Bush's problem. Well, how about we just go back to letting the states handle their educational systems? Because quite frankly, it's disgusting to me that we have kids graduating high school who have never said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. It is appalling to me that we have kids graduating high school who have never read and been tested on the Constitution. It really upsets me that we have kids graduating Votech school who may have seen a torque wrench in a book and know what it is in theory, but have never had one in their hands. Now, most states have lotteries where that money is supposed to be going to the schools and the roads. And Louisiana, by the way, is doing really good without federal highway funds. I mean, I wouldn't want to go across there on no crotch rocket on I-10, but hey, on a gold wing, it ain't so bad. Well, it didn't used to be. They kept their drinking age down to what? Yeah, that drinking age, that's another example of federal overreach. And I know that there's a lot of people that think that this is about being hard on Mr. Obama. It's not about, it is about you, but it's not. Because we have laws on the books that have gotten so far out of hand, it's pathetic. I can't even build an engine to sell within the state of Florida, not even outside of Sarasota County. I can't even build and sell one legally to my neighbor without passing a whole bunch of EPA crap. I think that's wrong. As far as I'm concerned, the EPA should be able to set the standards. If we can meet them, great. That's the way it should be. We shouldn't have to send an engine off to them for testing. We shouldn't have to pay for testing. We shouldn't have to pay for jack damn shit. If they catch us manufacturing them and they don't meet the EPA standards, great. bust us. I feel the same about many of the other things that are going on. We can go back to Ronald Reagan's era, when Nancy Reagan and Linda Lovelace caused the kitty perv laws to come into effect, which I agree with. I do not think that someone my age, I don't think that a 30-year-old should be with a 15-year-old. I'm 54. Well, almost. If I got a birthday this year, it would happen at the end of this month. But I don't get one this year. I do agree 100% that that shit's wrong, you know. I'm in favor of that. But it was so poorly written and then enacted. And now we have 18-year-olds. Well, he's not 18 anymore, and he's actually out now. So this did indeed happen before you took office. Who went to prison for having consensual sex with their 17-year-old girlfriend because the parents complained? And I understand that that happened at the state statute level, but I also understand that that state, word for word, it's almost a direct model of the federal statutes. I think that's a crying shame. I think an 18-year-old should be able to date a 15, 16, 17-year-old. I think a 21-year-old should be able to date a 16-year-old. Cut it off about 21, 22, somewhere in there. You know, keep it a reasonable age margin, whatever you want to say. And, you know, this Common Core stuff, just teaching them to meet, to take tests basically, and follow a propagandist. That's the most polite word that I can describe it with. A propagandist line, instead of teaching them, giving them the ability to think, to comprehend, to analyze. Those are what we should be teaching them: reading, writing, arithmetic, history, social studies, without bias, without federal interference, because quite frankly the school systems did a whole lot better when it was the states handling them. I've had kids on my own team, and I retired in 2000. You Secret Service boys, I've attracted attention with these videos before. I know this. I've met a couple of them in person. One of them was even bold enough to tell me what he was up to. And yes, I have a hard time holding my tongue on this. I have a hard time holding my tongue on many things. Another was nice enough to tip his hand. So I know I've attracted that attention before, and I know that I'm not in jail, so they must have determined that I'm serious when I say that I pose no threat to any damn politician. But during your time in office, it's not just the NSA, TSA, and Homeland Insecurity that's gotten out of hand. We have the federal government providing small-town police with MRAPs and APVs. Not just armored vehicles, armed vehicles. And yes, I can fully see the point of a SWAT team needing those. I cannot see the point of Harlan, Iowa, population 12,000 with a crime rate pretty goddamn low, needing one. I cannot see Miles City, Montana needing one. Nor Dillon, where they've never had reason to even use one. I understand the concept of preventive maintenance. I do that on my motorcycles and aircraft all the fucking time. Well, I used to do it on my aircraft. I can't fly anymore for health reasons. And I have thought about getting that sportsman's ticket, but you know, to me, coming out of a heavy going into this little lightweight, no. I'm sorry, that's just not going to make my dick tingle. No way I'd even remotely enjoy that. And yes, I've built ultralights, I've built kit planes, and I don't mean just little fucking Lancers. I mean, I've built kit planes from the ground up, my own design, that never would have passed inspection anyway, but I had fun fucking with them. You know, I did a lot of things for side money during my career. Every time we came back to the States, if we were out 3 months, we came back, we had 2 months off with nothing to do. And when we were in the States, on jobs in the States, hey, me and a buddy of mine, we'd go to the cycle salvage, and while everybody else was watching TV, we were putting motorcycles together. We would go out there in the evenings after work, because usually our day started at 0500. 3 o'clock, we still had a couple hours to sneak out to the cycle salvage, start lining some parts out so we could get out there Saturday morning, slam something together. And the deal was, in Alabama back then, you didn't need a title on anything 1975 or older, and you could register it by the title or the engine. So, I mean, we had some pretty weird combinations going there. Those were the days, eh? Now I won't even buy a bike without a title, because it's too much hassle to get one. Yeah, bill of sale does not cut it for me. I happen to live in Florida, and they've got so many hoops and hurdles to jump through that it's just not worth my time. I just won't buy one without a title. And the few bikes that I have without titles right now, I still have my old Alabama registration in my name. If not, they're in my daughter's name. Also, during your terms, this birther thing, you know, granted, I believe there's a little bit of doubt there, but I'm not about to join the birther movement. I mean, I sincerely hope that that whole issue gets cleared up between the birth certificate, social security card, selective service registration, solely because I choose, it's a choice not to believe that someone could make president without actually being born in the United States, a natural born citizen. But I do have my doubts. I'm honest enough to admit that. I'm also honest enough to admit that I will never vote Democrat unless I meet a Democrat that believes in the Constitution. And I have not met that yet. I vote Constitutional Party on all of the lower elections. Governor and up, I vote Republican solely because there has not been a Constitutional Party candidate in my lifetime who stands a snowball chance in hell of getting there. Maybe in the Senate races. I've actually seen that we've had libertarians make it in there, you know what I'm saying? And they're pretty close to Constitutional Party. You consider them to be terrorists. You consider Republicans and Tea Party members who are faithful to America to be terrorists. I've seen the Democratic Party go from meek to completely emboldened. They're actually threatening the lives of Tea Party members. And I have seen the same in reverse. Percentage-wise, and I did this number earlier. Oh, where the fuck did I put that? I had that in Chrome. And I saved it in Google Docs. But anyway, it's just taking too goddamn long. The percentage, if you were to put the Democrat/liberal side at 100%, call that the top number, the threats from the Tea Party side are less than 12% of that number. And this was just on a random sampling. I used an artificial intelligence entity. How do I describe that one? We'll just call him Beastie. To do the sampling, and I made sure that it was fair, unbiased, public record search. I think that's a shame. I also think that during your terms in office, reign, it has gotten to the point where me and my cousin, who have been threatening each other's lives since we were able to walk and talk, and he's pretty high up in the state patrol here in Florida. Yeah, I'm from Alabama. I've got relatives up there too. I've got relatives all the way up into Canada. But we've threatened each other's lives. Man, I'm gonna bust a beer bottle over your head. Yeah, that's a terroristic threat these days. You know, I have seen children getting kicked out of school for having a toy gun less than the size of a quarter, or for eating a Pop-Tart into a gun shape, for pointing fingers. Now, I have not seen that directly. I've seen that via YouTube, the internet, and even on the news. I think that's horribly wrong. I think that's horribly anti-American. And I am more than familiar with the statutes that made that possible, caused that at the federal level. I've seen more shoddy, I guess that's a polite term, legislation being proposed in the House and Senate in the past 8 years. Notice I didn't blame you for that. I've also seen some of your writings, which outright overstep the boundaries of the Constitution. I've also heard some of the things that you say, words that have left your mouth. And I'm not talking about just, you know, the popular ones like, oh, it seems the founding fathers put a system into place that's harder to get around than I thought. I'm talking about, I actually haunt opencongress.org. I'm retired. I've got nothing better to do. And like I said, I'm just watching the show. You could ask me right now to participate in the game on either side, and I would not. I'll kick back and I'll watch. I hope like hell that America doesn't come to a civil war during my lifetime. I hope like hell that shit gets straightened out on its own. And I've heard you say that you would like to raise taxes again. How much do we have to take? I am in that tax bracket of plus the amount, plus 33% of the amount over. Now, add on my property taxes, and that puts, even if I was at the bottom of that tax bracket, which I'm not, add on my property taxes, and that means that 71.2% of my income is gone right there, just between federal and property taxes. And you wish to take more. The insurance that I pay for my daughter has gone from $383 a month to almost $900. It's $800 and high change. And she's got coverage that she doesn't even need. but it meets the law, and I am a law-abiding citizen in anything that I do. Before I do something, before I design a device, if I get an idea in my head, I'm on Westlaw, I'm looking for precedents, I'm looking for statutes. I'm on Justia, I'm looking for precedents, I'm looking for statutes. I'm fighting cases from both sides, making sure, and I don't mean fighting cases in a courtroom, I mean I'm looking up the precedents as a prosecutor and as a defending attorney. Defense attorney, I'm sorry. And my reason for that is because I'll stay, here's the gray area, right here between these two hands. I'll stay on this side of the gray area. I don't like coming into the gray area. I damn sure won't cross the line. Not intentionally. Not willingly. Either. I know a lot of people who do. I associate with them, and when they start talking about their criminal activities, I usually either walk away or tell them I'd rather not hear it. And that's not because I have anything to do with law enforcement. That's not because I have anything to do with anything. It's just part of my basic internal belief system. Now, I should mention that those taxes, those amounts, are before I go out and buy something at 7% Florida sales tax, plus we have 40 cents a gallon on every gallon of gas. Yeah, I believe we can go into diesel, we can go into excise tax on tires, we can go into road use tax on a couple of my trucks, we can go into which pretty much, and then you got to buy license plates for everything. They tax you when you buy those. It's kind of messed up that you would want more. I mean, I think a lot of the problem is, people are getting, it's now Obama checks. It used to be earned income credit during Bush's administration, reign, whatever you want to call it. Now they're calling them Obama checks. Yeah, well, they're taking my money and giving it to people that, you know what, if they made $20,000 and they somehow don't owe any taxes, keep the money, don't give them nothing. Maybe lower their taxes. Because quite frankly, the more money that is floating around in the economy instead of in the government, the better off Americans will be. I mean, that's economics 101. When you strap somebody as hard as I get strapped, or as hard as the average person gets strapped, what's the percentage of your property taxes versus your income?
I don't know, never.
10, 15%?
Yeah.
And your tax bracket is what?
Tell me my tax bracket.
You're pretty close to mine.
I don't know. Never discussed it.
Okay, I get it. Quite frankly, I think it's unreasonable past 10% total between state and federal and sales taxes. I think that's completely unreasonable. States have revenues coming in, and instead of buying new squad cars every year or $250,000 MRAPs, they really could make do with what they got for an extra year or so. I can understand on the computers keeping the technology up. I can fully understand that. I mean, basically by the time you bought your new computer and walked out the store with it, it's obsolete. also understand that here recently we had a guy here in Florida that he left Florida, he's going up through Maryland on his way to another state. Now he had a concealed carry permit here in Florida. Well, Maryland's got them tag readers on their car, on their squad cars, and it was Maryland State Patrol or Transportation Authority, whatever the fuck they call their state patrol up there, that pulled him over for no reason other than they wanted to find his gun. And quite frankly, I don't think they should have ever pulled him over unless he was speeding or had a light out or something like that. He's got a concealed carry permit. Yeah, we gotta pull him over. And it was the tag reader that tripped it. I'm also familiar with the fact that Maryland has some hives. That's what one gentleman calls them. I call them pods. That belong to the NSA. And I'm very aware that information gets fed to state authorities. I don't think that that was the case. I think that they were using a cached database of all Florida CCW holders, which I really don't see why Maryland had any business having that, other than if they had already pulled someone over for something else, then yeah, that would be legitimate. That yeah, it shows up you got a CCW. I don't see it being legitimate that they pull him over for a weapon that he did not even have with him. Was not even in his vehicle, it was right here in Florida. I don't think that's right at all. By the federal authorities overstepping their bounds so far in the past 5 years, the number of local, state law enforcement officers overstepping their bounds has increased because the fear of repercussions, of legal repercussions, is almost gone. I mean, literally, that's been since before I retired, but shortly after I retired, when I actually used to show up in person at a certain bar, I had a customer in there, he happened to be a Leo. We were trying to find the man a ride home. He put out his badge. I ain't worried, they're not gonna give me a ticket. I think that shit's horribly wrong. I truly do. The fact that he would even think that that was acceptable, regardless of how drunk he was. Because the average person loses their license for a year on a DV. We all know I went 8 years without one, got it back. I've been a nice boy ever since, but insurance companies didn't forget about that, even though the state doesn't care. Fucking insurance companies, $1,400 a month to insure a damn truck. It's not worth it to me. That's why I live in Florida, where I don't need insurance on a motorcycle. It's optional. I'll wear a helmet. I don't mind wearing a helmet. And this Florida no-fault insurance is basically useless. Yeah, I've had people literally back into one of my bikes, knock it down, and there was no insurance company paying for that shit. No one's paying for that shit but me. And that's another thing. When you were running for office, you said that Obamacare would make insurance more affordable for everyone. Yet, it's made it more expensive for everyone. You said that Obamacare would make our medical system better for everyone. Well, let's address that first one first, that it would make medical insurance affordable for everyone. Now, I said before, way the hell back in a blog, before I even started doing these videos, that I knew that was BS, because historically, It's a fact that every state that has adopted mandatory automobile insurance, within a year the premiums at least doubled, if not tripled. Because the insurance companies were like, hey, we gotta have it. And while I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I have done the GMO experiments. And not just the corn ones, I've done it with cocoa beans. You want an interesting trick? Nestle Quick Chocolate. They're using some GMO altered cocoa beans. Genetically modified cocoa beans. Well, make you a cup of coffee. Put it on the ground in a cockroach-infested house. After you've drank it, just leave the little bit up that's always on the bottom, about that much, you know, because that chocolate always settles. You will have a cup full of dead roaches. Well, not full, but you'll have a layer across the bottom of dead roaches. So, I checked to make sure it wasn't my coffee. I switched from Admiral Dickinson's blend to Cafe Bustelo. Okay, it wasn't my coffee. So I checked to see if it was the combination of coffee and chocolate. But I used Hershey's with that experiment. Didn't kill the roaches. Same experiment with Nestle's, did kill the roaches. So maybe there's another chemical in the Nestle's Quick aside from the cocoa beans. I haven't dug that deep into it. That reacts with caffeine or something in the coffee. But just by the fact that, I mean, come on, a cockroach? Cockroaches are smart enough not to go into a microwave. They'll go all in the electronics around the son of a bitch, but they won't go in the microwave horn. They won't go in the body of the microwave. Cockroach, other than smashing them or poisoning them, it's one of the hardest things in the world to kill. And granted, I'm not equipped to do autopsies on them, but it alarms me that they would pass like that. It alarms me that when I did do research into where Nestle's was getting their cocoa beans, I did find that they were buying some genetically modified crops. And maybe it's just those two particular lot numbers that I tested with, because I did buy Nestle's from two different lots. Yet we have a Monsanto Protection Act on the books. It's pretty scary. It really truly is. Silogen, or what is that other one? Yeah, who cares? It's pretty scary that when we had this oil spill out here in the Gulf, which was during your terms, there was a federally issued moratorium on marine studies. Well, I never stopped my studies. I like to study little microcrustaceans. I've got a tank breeding right now. I knew what was in the water that wasn't normal for our waters. I kept my mouth shut. That oil is coming back up, by the way. And I don't mean just the stuff that you can see. I mean the residual chemicals are showing up in our own intercoastal here. And you can test for some of those with off-the-shelf, get them in any water quality center test kits. Some of them you do have to go to some pretty specialized aquarium suppliers. What's that damn up in Apopka? Is it Apopka or Opelika? Anyway, there's an aquarium supply here in Florida that I went to that sold me what I needed for some of my little tests. And most of the rest of them, yeah, you know, For the little critters I like to stare at, I can use a magnifying glass. And most of the time I cheat, and I have a JVC Averio with a nice rubber ring around the lens I can put right up against the aquarium wall and throw it up on that 35-inch screen, and that's a lot better than any magnifying glass. And while they normally look white to people, they're actually every color of the rainbow. Which brings up another thing, and this has most definitely happened during your terms. See, by the 90s, the racism thing had passed off. I mean, nobody really gave a crap. And yes, I do remember you being introduced as the senator from Kenya. I do remember everything I've ever read, whether I want to or not. Things that I've heard, maybe not. Things that I've seen, I remember every kid I've ever seen on a leash in a fucking Walmart. And that's been going on since before you were there. But the racism thing has gotten kicked back off since you've been in office. And a lot of it's been federally funded, which I think is horrible. Yeah, I have nothing against anyone of any color. I don't fit either side of the racial coin. I grew up the Russian Jewish kid in northern Alabama in the 60s. I left home in 72 at the age of 12. But by that time, and that had more to do with my stepmother than it did with anything else. And she'd kick me out of the house, and my dad he'd get home, she'd tell him that I left on my own. And I'm not going to get into that. I would not. I've had a weird, wonderful, fucked up life. It's turned me into one unusual individual, but I wouldn't trade 1 second of my life for one goddamn thing. Even as crippled and fucked up as I am right now. I mean, I spend more days fucking hurting to walk. I don't show it. But back on the racism thing, that has kicked off during your term. And I mean, it's kicked off badly. And you can't say that I won't screw a black chick. Because I dated one for about a year there. And that one I liked. Now, I did kick one out of my bed. I kicked one straight the hell out of my house after about a month. Back in, that had to have been 80 or 81. Yeah. But that had nothing to do with the color of her skin. That had to do with, she had this chemical that she put in her hair, and she put this bag over it, and that nasty smelly shit got all over the pillows, and I just couldn't stand it, and she wouldn't quit using it. That's how that worked. So that had nothing to do with racism. So there's the background. I really could care less. I mean, I've had women of every, the only woman that I haven't had so far is a Chinese girl that I know of. Well, at least that I would be interested in. So you can't pull the race card with me. Got friends of every color of the rainbow. But during your term, I mean, you yourself have said some things that are, I would be inclined to say, over the line, even if just slightly, but over the racist line. Many of your associates have said many things that are definitely over the racism line. And during your term, we've gone from, we had a relative sense of security here in America of being able to freely speak our minds to, you guys want to shut down reporters who don't work for a regular news company? Well, you know what? A lot of the news companies that are out there right now, look at their origins. They began with somebody with a pen and a paper. It wasn't no real news company to begin with. But every American, regardless of whether they work for a news company or not, has the right to speak their mind. They also have the right, you know, if they are even presenting themselves as being a reporter, whether they're a blogger or not, if they're trying to be a reporter, they technically are. And should be protected by the First Amendment and not have to reveal their sources. And I'm oversimplifying that. I'm being incredibly polite. But the racism thing and the political correctness thing in regards to racism has gotten so far out of hand that there's websites where I can't even type in the word raccoon without the coon being turned to asterisk. Turns out that that's partially federally funded, that site. And in video games, I cannot even use my old call sign, Spook81, because spook somehow is a racist term. Yet it was legitimately my call sign. And those are just tiny examples. The paranoia that your administration has created amongst people looking for racism. The Aryan Brotherhood had almost died off before you took office. Them fuckers are coming back. Not because they were really getting active, but because you put them back in the public spotlight and caused the interest in people joining. We have hate crime statutes on the books that get applied only against whites. I think, quite frankly, that they should be applied both ways, or none at all. And during your administration, you have signed an executive order which basically gave black kids a little advantage in school. No. If you're going to give it to one, you give it to everybody, or none. That's my honest opinion. I know that sucks to the liberal / Democrat / socialist mind, but that's my opinion. Equal means equal. During your reign, you have basically crippled our military. And I don't mean just overseas. You want people to patrol with unloaded weapons? I'm sorry, I'm a crazy motherfucker, but if I'm on patrol, which, like I said before, I was never regular military. I was a dumbass contractor. But, and all I did was install radar and service radio towers, shit like that. And yeah, we got to play with some pretty interesting shit in the lab, but like I said, we had more failures than successes. But the racism thing has gotten too far out of hand. Literally, during your administration, you have caused people to look for it, to hunt for it. On both sides of the fence. Granted, mostly on the black side of the fence. I mean, it's... And maybe that's because of who I'm reading and listening to, because quite often I listen, I don't actually read all of the stuff that I play with on the internet. I got these wonderful Bluetooth headsets, and I've known about text-to-speech since the fucking early 90s. Back when 386s first came out, I had, actually, yeah, that's 386, early 486 days. had fucking voice command on my PS2 Model 80. I also had text-to-speech as far back as my IBM XT. I didn't have internet on that XT though. So we have to go a little bit newer than that, but you get the idea. I really, truly, I'm not going to say anything other than ashamed at what I've seen our government create in regards to racism. You've brought it back. You've been successful at that. Only you've brought it back the other way, because now it seems, and like I say, this may be based on the channels and stuff that I listen to, but I listen to a pretty broad spectrum. I read a pretty broad spectrum. So it may be based on, you know, I'm only listening to a limited number of things. But you've actually reversed racism. This knockout game that seems to be getting played everywhere, it seems to be mostly black on white. And I did say mostly because I have dug into it and I have seen it the other way around. But I've also run some basic numbers. Unfortunately, there's not very many numbers out there. And I've dug in just far enough to see that the hate crime statutes very rarely get applied in reverse, which I think is wrong. I think if you're going to apply them to one, you need to apply them across the board to all, period. Me personally, I hate no one. I have a lot against illegal aliens, and here we go on another point. The Immigration Act of 1986 has actually caused a lot of homeless people here in America because they can't meet the ID requirements, regardless if they just got out of prison and they threw away their discharge ID because, you know, they didn't want to show that at the liquor store or at the bank when they're cashing their paycheck, or, you know, whatever the fuck reason, or some states don't even give them one. Some states, if they get out on parole, all they get is their parole thing, which isn't good enough to go get you a driver's license or a social security card or anything else. There should be variance in that law for American citizens. You know, no one should really be required to have ID to work in America, as long as they sound like they're from here. I mean, and the ones who don't sound like they're American, yeah, make them show a green card. Yet you want to introduce another 30 million unlawful immigrants, illegal immigrants, criminals. Illegal equals criminal in my mind. Into the United States, and that's actually probably going to be slightly more than the estimated numbers, because they're coming across the border in droves. Texas finally shut their own border down. You've interfered with Arizona shutting their border down. There's actually signs around that one national park saying, hey, you don't really want to go here because these suckers are armed and running drugs. During your administration, justice has actually armed some of those cartels. Granted, their original intentions may have been good, but their actions were criminal. Even with the warrant, the judge that signed off on it would be an accessory, because he knew it was a criminal action when he signed off on it, or he really had no business being a judge. Yet, and now you have, back on the military, you have cut benefits to soldiers who have served in the military, gotten shot up, legs blown off, done their 20 years. You've cut their benefits. You've cut their retirements in favor of keeping welfare. A I'm sorry, that's just not right. Cut welfare. You've manipulated the job numbers to remove those who have fallen out of the workforce from those numbers. When the reality is, by them being out of the workforce, they're still part of those numbers. They're still unemployed. You've made it incredibly hard for Americans to open a business. And those that do have businesses, you've made it really hard on them. And if you make it hard on the ma and pa shops, you make it really hard on everybody else, because if the ma and pa shop can't afford to hire any help, ma and pa's the only one that's doing any good, and most of them are struggling right now, to be quite honest. Granted, Florida's doing a little bit better than it was. Wisconsin's definitely doing better than it was. Yet, because I believe in the Constitution, I'm probably considered a terrorist. Yes, I've read the list of keywords, and I don't mean just the ones that show up on the internet. That's an alarming list. That's a horrifying list. Yet I've never killed anyone stateside. And even when I wasn't stateside, I never killed anyone that wasn't trying to kill me at that time. No one stateside has ever seen me pull a gun in anger. No one has ever even seen me show them that I'm carrying a weapon, other than one time in a bar, decades, literally decades ago. And all I did was open my coat like this, put my hands behind my back, revealed that I had something with me, and the guy backed off, the little guy. So I did no wrong. But that big motherfucker was big enough, I wouldn't even take him. And back then, I was still in my prime. I could stand flat-footed and kick a light out in an 8-foot ceiling. A flat panel light in an 8-foot ceiling. And still get the bulbs behind the panel, not just break the panel. It's horrifying to me that, because of some of the things that I read on the internet, that I could be targeted as a potential terrorist. When the reality is, there's no way that I would harm anyone willingly, unless they were trying to harm me at that time. And I go out of my way to not get in those situations, ever. I truly do. And most people are about the same. And now where you're preaching about more gun control, well, let's look at the crime rates starting in 1968 when you took the guns away from felons. Skyrocketed, ain't they? If you eliminate Chicago, LA, New York, Miami, and Kansas City, the gun-related crimes in the United States are almost none. If you look at the states which have open carry available, in the states where most people are pretty much armed anyway, or you just don't know, you know, they have the lowest crime rates there are. And that brings up the reality of, yes, there are a few mentally deranged individuals out there, but for every one of those that you can find, if they thought that everybody else was armed, or if they didn't know if another person was armed, it's very likely that they would not be as willing to commit crimes with guns. And there are more effective weapons than guns that you need to worry about. You don't have any worries from me, specifically. No one has any worries from me. But I've built weapons that literally, at 20 feet, I could take down. Body armor would not matter. Your skin's gonna be exposed somewhere. It's only good for one zap. And it's extremely dangerous, the amount of radiation that the user is potentially exposed to if that waveguide is made wrong, or if the coil is wound wrong, or if the waveguide melts through before the coil. But literally, you could take out anyone in a 2-degree cone at 50 feet. You could take out other weapons while you're seeing on YouTube these maglev weapons using the same basic magnetic levitation technology as trains. I've played with some stuff. I can't see anybody wanting to put a car battery on there. Well, actually, that'd be a D8 fucking big ass cat battery. You know, like they use in dozers and shit. Only you'd have to have 2 of them because you need 48 volts for it to work. I've seen magnetic weapons that can put a 1-inch diameter solid steel ball through 8-inch plate steel. I've worked on those weapons. So guns are not the problem. Yeah, this is illustrative only. This is not a device. One of my specialties is hiding things in little pens, or hiding things in portable radios. In the 80s, I had a portable radio that could jump a lightning bolt 20 feet. Simple Tesla coils, couple of step-up transformers. Won't go into details, but it was homemade, and the radio part still worked. There are weapons far more powerful than guns. Because if I had that kind of shit in the 80s, imagine what you can make now. That little device, the microwave device that I described a minute ago, is no bigger than something this size. And it uses pure microwave RF. And like I say, it would be very dangerous to the user. That's why the device was never manufactured or put into production. Because the device failed more often than it worked. Literally aiming it at the ground one time by mistake because it fell off the test platform. We killed everything organic in a circle about that big, getting to about that big, for 6 feet down in the ground. And that wasn't in Alabama red clay, that was in that good fucking Yankee soil up in North Dakota, because that was the only state where we could lawfully test that type of device without all kinds of crap from the FCC. At that time, can't do it anymore, which is why I quit playing with things like that. But now, there are a lot sharper minds than mine out there. You're already starting to see people modifying tasers. You're already starting to see law enforcement officers carrying modified tasers capable of killing people. And I don't mean just because they weren't properly calibrated. I mean because, you know, the battery got replaced. Oh, that little 9.6 volt NiCad got replaced with a fucking 18 volt. Still fit in there, same voltage. Wow, let's see, we can put in a lithium ion and get some more amperage out of it. You know, people have already figured this shit out. You know, where the EMP devices that you see on TV, you know, the cops shoot it at your car and yeah, well, 86, I came up with something that accidentally took down a radio station. Later, that same year, we tested it against one of the Cuban broadcast stations from a range well outside of Cuban waters. And while we weren't able to take them down, we were able to take their main amp down and force them over onto backup power, their backup amp, while they replaced the finals in their main, because the 8 minutes that that device worked wasn't enough to take them down. It was enough to take down everything electronic on the vessel. We thanked God we had diesels. And we thank God we had a captain and most of us on board that knew how to read a fucking compass. So yeah, somebody has probably figured out a way to make something like that safe. And you notice I have not described any details on that. I take my non-disclosure and non-compete agreements seriously, just like I take my oath to the Constitution seriously. And I sincerely, truthfully, and honestly wish that you would take your oath to the Constitution seriously. We have so many laws on the books right now where the federal government has overstepped its bounds, overstepped its constitutional boundaries. You know, in the welfare system, granted they throw it under the farm bill, you know, you got all these people on food stamps and this and that. Well, during your administration, and actually while you were running for office as a senator, not just the first time you were running for office as president, you have made it acceptable. It used to be, when I was growing up, if somebody was on welfare, that was a disgraceful thing. If they were on disability and people knew that they were able to work, we were all disgusted with them. Black, white, green, we were disgusted with them. I mean, granted, there were housing projects that were pretty full of people like that, but you know, the rest of the people stayed away from stuff like that. And yeah, there were places like Mason Court where, yeah, cops wouldn't even go through there unless it was 2 or 3 of them high-lis. Same thing for a while, right after the riots. What's going on to me is just not right. You would rather pass out welfare than support our troops. You would rather pass out welfare than lower people's taxes to where they can afford to hire people. Quite frankly, I would have a full-time assistant right now if it was not for my taxes. But if you take the kid who used to work at McDonald's and you take what I've got left over after I pay taxes, even with my income, that welfare shit has him doing better than I'm doing. And that's not even counting in the Section 8 house that he lives in. Yet you want to raise taxes more. That's pretty messed up. That's really messed up. Now, I am no legal eagle. I'm only a fair paralegal. And that's, you wouldn't even have to be a paralegal. All somebody would have to do would be to go down through and, you know, we've got a couple of pages of requirements for the government. Did you know that if I took every federal statute, every federal regulation, my warehouse is not big enough if I printed it out. Using, and I did the math using 20-pound bond paper. I'm sorry, sir. I think that's a little bit extreme, sir. I think instead of creating new laws, you need to get your administration to go through the existing laws and say, hey, this has got to go, this has got to go, this has got to go. And if you, in the process, gut the government down to where it operates within its financial means, fine, because it would be a lot easier on the American people. And the mentality that you have created in DC, and not just in DC, fuck, it has spread to Langley, McLean. It has spread to Utah, Washington, here in Florida, all over the place. Even South Dakota, come on. Montana, Colorado. Colorado, hey, you finally left them alone on the drugs, but we got some federal operatives up there that are pretty, they think they have the right to be badasses, and they think that, yeah, all right, let's just limit it to the scope of the mentality that you have seemingly, your administration. I'm not going to blame it directly on you because I don't believe it to be your direct fault. I believe that you kind of go with the flow of what's around you, and I understand that. I understand that fully as to why. But the mentality that you have created is that the people are there to serve the government, and the reality is the government is there to serve the people and is supposed to act in the best interests of the people. And the best interests of the people are not served with the government passing out free money to everyone. I'm sorry if that person is not able to pay their student loan. Well, hey, they entered into that agreement. If it takes them the rest of their life to pay that student loan off, that's the honorable thing to do. And it is also by the fact that the federal government granted them that student loan. I understand Pell Grants don't have to be paid back and other grants don't have to be paid back, but loans do. And if the federal government granted them that loan, it is the federal government's responsibility to collect on that loan. Why? Because it's not the government's money. The government belongs to the people. The people do not belong to the government. It is the people's money because the government belongs to the people. Well, it's supposed to anyway. That's what I grew up believing. It's shameful. I grew up believing that if they could afford that $300 pair of sneakers but couldn't afford their rent, they need to either get a roommate to cover half, or they need to get a second job, or if all they can afford is that $200 a month trailer down there in Northport, instead of whining about it, they need to pull their bootstraps up and get another job, or start hustling fenders on the side, start building bikes on the side, start building cars on the side. And I understand that it's really hard to build cars on the side because most states, if you sell more than 5 cars a year, you need a dealer's license, which requires a bond from an insurance company and a lot of hassles that a lot of people don't want. Some states, I believe it's either Iowa or Nebraska, I think. I'll remember it 20 minutes from now. I always do when I don't need to. And then I'll remember it word for word. But some states, you have to have a place to work on them if you're going to sell them. Okay, But a garage at a house isn't acceptable. Even though you've only got one car in the driveway and one in the garage and you're doing maybe one car a month. That's not acceptable. In one state that I looked up, or you had to have a place to drain oil to get that dealer's license. It's like, okay, that doesn't make no sense. Because of federal overregulation, somebody able to make furniture in their garage, well, the states have generally created laws saying that no, you can't have a business in your garage in a residential area. And I understand that that's at the state level. I also understand fully that that is increased and intensified at the state levels during your administration as an indirect result of increased federal regulations. And notice I was pretty clear on that, as an indirect result of increased federal regulations. Now, historically, some of the greatest businesses, some of the largest corporations in the world were started in people's machine sheds in their garages.
Computers.
Yeah, Steve Jobs in his garage. You know what? He couldn't do that today. That would be unlawful. I think that's a crying shame. In my own personal situation, I own so many bikes that I've bought over the years that it's pathetic. I will never get to all of them before I pass. I'm sorry to say that, I just won't. I couldn't even work on my own bikes in my own driveway. Sarasota County's got laws against that shit. So I had to rent a shop that I physically can't even drive to most of the time. For a while there, I did pretty good. For about a year there, I was able to get there 3, 4, sometimes 5 days a week. It cost me dearly in pain, and it's only 5 minutes from the house. And that was on a soft-ass Goldwing, or light-ass little CB350s with the shock style down to number 2. Because I do pass out from pain. And my rule is if I can't get it off the center stand, I don't ride that day. Here lately, I can't even get it off the side stand. But because I worked on a few friends' bikes, you know, the county wanted to call it a business, and it wasn't. They were mine. And granted, you know, yeah, I had CB900, and for about 2 weeks I had a parts bike out there for it that I had to buy. And a lot of my bikes along the way, I have to buy parts bikes because that's the only way I can afford to get the parts. I'm not a rich man. I pay dearly for keeping my properties. I am not a rich man by any means. In fact, I'm not hurting, but I'm not doing very well either, money-wise. So if I have to go out and buy a $200 parts bike to get the pieces and parts that I want for one that I want to keep, and the parts bike runs, because, you know, most of the time, you know, if there's enough of the parts bike there to make it run, I'll move my nasty, ugly, rusty shit over to it and sell it. Well, there's ways to do that, you know, flip titles, you know, just buy them from the other guy, get them to, hey man, just leave it open. I'll get the next guy to fill it in. Keep your fucking plate though. That way that way you know nobody's riding it around. Because I can't afford 200 something bucks to register one every damn time. I only get one free plate for my primary vehicle, you know, car, trailer, bike. The rest of them I gotta pay for. And I still have to pay the, you know, registration and shit. All they really waive is the plate fee. I think they waived the title transfer fee too. I don't really care. I don't pay that much attention. I can't afford to buy plates, but the ones that were in my driveway, I did have plates for. Granted, the plates were not on most of them. but I at least had them. And granted, a couple of them were in my daughter's name because, like I said earlier, I do not like breaking the law, and they would have put me over the limit to avoid having a dealer's license. Because technically a motorcycle is a motor vehicle, and Florida's law doesn't quite specify clearly enough automobile for my peace of mind. There's guys that could be flipping boats, and I can understand you don't want the smell of fiberglass in your neighborhood, but, you know, if it's just a little touch up on the gel coat, let them get away with that. If all they gotta do is fix the engine and they're not leaving oil all over the place, let them get away with that. Let them make their side money. If that's their primary money, it doesn't matter. You know, some liberal thinks that, oh man, you're degrading our property values. Well, you know what? I paid $500,000 for my fucking house too. That ain't what degraded the property values. My shit's fucking cleaned up now and the property values still all suck. $180,000 if I'm goddamn lucky. Climbing back up though. So that's a good thing. And Mr. Obama, if you actually see this, which I said at the beginning, I very seriously doubt that you will, I hope you at least take a little bit of it to heart. That's all I've really got to say, sir. Well, sir, do have one other thing that I would like to say, that I think is something that every kid, follow me up with that camera, watch the screen while you do it. Oh, watch your screen. I'm only going to be able to do this once or twice. This is something that I will throw in at the end. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sir.